When you try your best but you don't succeed, when you get what you want but not what you need, when you feel so tired but you can't sleep.
Let's do it, okay.
Students, please take your seats. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Elie Wisel. Most of you know he is the author of the memoir Night that we just recently read in class. Today he has come to visit our class and discuss his tragic experiences and answer questions about the Holocaust. I would like to welcome Mr. Elie Wisel.
Good morning. I would like to thank you for inviting me into your class this morning. I'm here to discuss the tragedies I faced throughout the Holocaust with you all. So here it is. It was 1941. I was a 12-year-old boy living in the Transylvanian town of Sayet. My parents were shopkeepers, and my father was a highly respected man within the Jewish community. I had a younger sister named Zora.
Excuse me. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Sayet is a part of Romania, is that correct?
Yes, they were. Moshe then told us that Jews were forced to dig mass graves for themselves and were killed by the Gestapo. Everyone in town accused him of being a lunatic and refused to believe his story. In the spring of 1944, community leaders were arrested. Jewish valuables were confiscated and were first forced to wear yellow stars. Eventually, the Jews were confined to small ghettos, crowded together in narrow streets behind barbed wire fences. That is so terrible. Would you keep your mouth shut for 5 minutes so the man could speak? Would you shave your face daily so that your fellow classmates wouldn't vomit every time they looked at your face? Students, behave! We have a guest. Continuing on again. My family was among the last to leave Sayet. We were herded into another small ghetto after that. I will never forget Martha, a former servant of our family, offered to have us live with her. However, my father declined her offer. A few days later, the Nazis and their henchmen, the Hungarian police, herded the last Jews remaining inside onto cattle cars for Auschwitz. The cattle cars were small. There was almost no air to breathe. The heat was so intense, there was nowhere to sit, and everyone was hungry and thirsty. Madame Shatter, a middle-aged woman who was on the train with her 10-year-old son, she began to crack, and she began to scream, "Fire, fire," that she seen fire in the darkness outside the car. There was no fire visible. She terrified the Jews in the car. She was beaten to silence. Finally we arrived, and we were separated into groups. That was the last time I ever saw my mother and sisters. However, me and my father remained together. We were stripped and shaved, disinfected with gasoline, showered and clothespined, and clothed in prison uniforms. Then there was a required quarantine and medical inspection, including a dental search for gold crowns. I was then chosen by a capo to serve in a unit of prisoners whose job entails counting electrical fittings in a civilian warehouse. My father was also in the same unit. We were all so hungry, surviving on a bowl of soup and thin slice of stale bread daily. As hungry as we were, we wouldn't dare steal food. We once witnessed a child being murdered because he was caught stealing. This is very moving. Does everyone agree? Shortly after, I was separated from my father to work in a building unit. I was worried that my father would not pass the selection, and after several days, it turned out my father was deemed too weak to work. He was executed. My father brought me his knife and spoon. That would be my only inheritance. I was forced to leave and never see my father again. When I returned from home, there was a miracle. A second selection occurred among the condemned, and my father survived. Through the winter, my foot became very swollen, and I underwent an operation. While I was in the hospital recovering, the rumor of an approaching Russian army gave us new hope, but the Germans then decided to evacuate the camp before the Russians arrived. They thought the Jews in the infirmary would be put to death prior to the evacuation. My father and I chose to be evacuated. with the others. With my injured foot bleeding in the snow, I joined the rest of the prisoners at nightfall in the middle of a snowstorm. We began the evacuation of Buna. We were forced to run, malnourished, tired, and weak. We were herded into cattle cars, ordered to throw out bodies of dead men. My father, unconscious, was almost mistaken for dead and thrown from the car, but I succeeded in waking him. We go unfed, living on snow for days. As we passed through German towns, some of the locals would throw bread into the car and enjoy watching prisoners kill each other for food. The journey had fatally weakened my father. Days went by and I watched my father suffer. Finally, I woke up on January 29, 1945, to find that my father had been taken to the crematorium. I felt so much shame, but I did not cry. Instead, I felt relief. On April 11th, the American Army arrived. Now free, I, amongst all the other prisoners, thought only of feeding ourselves. I ended up with terrible food poisoning and spent weeks in the hospital, deathly ill. When finally I climbed out of bed and looked at myself in the mirror, from the depths of that mirror I saw a corpse. It gazed back at me. Wow, what a tragedy. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Wisel? You mentioned of people trying to steal food. Other than the young child, do you have any memories other than that? Yes, during an Allied air raid on Buna, during which every prisoner was supposed to be confined to his or her block, 2 cauldrons of soup were left unattended. I and many other prisoners watched as a man risked his life to crawl into the soup. The man reached the soup. There was a moment of hesitation, and he then lifted himself up to eat. As he stood over the soup, he was shot and fell lifelessly to the ground. Unbelievable. I think that all the students can agree. Is there any more questions? I suppose all of you are too shocked to have any more questions. Well, let's give Mr. Elie Wisel another round of applause and send him on his way. Thank you very much, Elie. Okay, you can press the button. Now, was that hard?